Welcome to the session, 6 ways to get insights on your Microsoft 365 usage. My name is John White. I'm the CTO and co-founder of tyGraph. I'm an Office Apps and Services MVP as well as a data platform MVP. So I've kind of been around the SharePoint space for a very, very long time and the Power BI space as long as, well, frankly, as long as there's been a Power BI. These are my particulars on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me at any point with any further questions that you might have. And yeah, that's me in the picture here doing what I like to do when I'm not doing this stuff. I'm a bit of an avid diver, and you'll probably see that in some of the pictures that I use just to punctuate the presentation as we go through. But without any further ado, let's dive in. Actually, before we do that, I just want to give a shout out to my podcast that I do with my friend Jason Himmelstein on a weekly basis. If you'd like to stay up to speed on the business intelligence news, the bifocal podcast is one that you should check out. We have guests and we stay abreast of current news in the Power BI space. All right. So today we're going to start by talking a little bit about what reporting and analytics are all about. And then we're going to go through these 6 different ways to get insights from your tenant. First off, we're going to have a look at what you can get out of the Microsoft 365 admin portal. We're going to look at the Microsoft 365 usage analytics app. We're going to talk a little bit about reporting APIs. This one might not be as well known as the first 2. And then dive into what's available in the unified audit log. We're going to explore what the graph has to offer, the Microsoft Graph, as well as a tool that is used to get data from the graph called Graph Data Connect. And then finally, we're briefly going to touch on some third-party products. I should caveat this session a little bit by saying tyGraph, my company is in the business of doing this stuff, providing these insights, and we are one of those third-party products. This session is not meant to be a sales pitch, obviously, but it basically does explain my familiarity with the area, and I will be using tyGraph in a couple of places as an example, but that's it. So I want to set that stage, and finally, of course, we're going to wrap up. All right. So let's start by talking a little bit about reporting and analytics, and frankly, what the difference between the two are. So to start with, if you've got questions about your Office 365 or your Microsoft 365 tenant, those questions will probably fall into one of these following categories. You want to know why you want to measure this stuff, because why you're doing it is going to affect the choice of how you do it and when you do it, et cetera, et cetera. It's a theme we're going to return to throughout this talk. Why you might want to measure some of this stuff? Well, some of the major themes are DLP, data loss prevention, and governance. Basically policing your tenant. Make sure that people are using your resources the right way. Identify things that aren't supposed to be happening, maybe. Communication effectiveness is another one, and it's a totally different tack. But in the case of communications, you may have a communication department that wants to understand the effectiveness of their initiatives. Being able to measure things like usage and views, etc., will help them with that. Adoption is still a very big deal in terms of measurement. We've certainly seen a lot of that over the past few months. It's been interesting to watch it analytically with our product. How much more things like Teams has become adopted. So, but measuring adoption is still very much a requirement. Something as mundane maybe as license management can be a big deal for some organizations. If you've got 30,000 employees and you're paying $10 a month for their license, you might want to know if only 25,000 of those employees are actually using the licenses. So measuring their usage of the tools might help you with some cost saving. It also might help you avoid some surprises when it comes time to true up with Microsoft. And then finally, troubleshooting. What happened? What something has happened in my tenant? I don't know what. I might want to examine all of the events leading up to a particular point in time or a particular thing happening. So these are all good reasons to want to measure what's happening in your tenant. When you're doing that, of course, it's not just why are you measuring it. What's important to know is what you're measuring. And these essentially, from a BI standpoint, we're talking about dimensions here. So we want to know, we want to be able to pivot down on some of these measures by user, maybe by workload, what tools are they using, what content, which documents are being well adopted, what devices are people using to access this content. That might inform how we design a UI. It might inform some decisions around bandwidth, things of that nature. And a very important dimension that is almost always going to be present in a report is the time dimension. And so we want to know how things are being used over time. And so we need to have a time span to report against, but we also need to be aware of what our time level of granularity is. Is it down to the month? Is it down to the week, day, second, things of that nature? All right. And all of this, I do like to draw a distinction between reporting and analytics. And the reason I want to draw that distinction is because I feel in a lot of ways these two terms get conflated. They're not the same thing. Reporting is answering a question that you have. Okay, you know ahead of time you're going to have this question. You construct a report, you run that report on a periodic basis, you get the answer you need. Done. Analytics, however, helps you answer questions you don't know you already have. So you need to construct or have your data in a particular shape to be able to drill around in it and say, I wonder why that number's off. I want to look at this way. I want to look at things that way, etc. That's analytics. They're both totally valid. But there are different tools for each, and it's important to understand which tools to use in which circumstances, and what it is you're trying to do, and how you can get your data in shape to do either one of them most efficiently. There's a link at the bottom of the slide that points to a blog post I published a little while back articulating that, and I tried to take a bit of a humorous tack. The picture in the slide you see here is artist rendering of a computer called Deep Thought. Deep Thought was from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Deep Thought was put into use to calculate the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And it went off and spent generations and generations to compute this. And finally, one day it was ready. It announced that the answer was, of course, 42. And people sat around, scratched their heads and said, 42, well, what does that really mean? And they asked the computer, well, what does it really mean? And the computer answered, I don't know that you've articulated the question properly. So they, of course, had to build another computer to come up with the question, et cetera, et cetera. The point here is you need to know what it is you're looking for. The report can give you the answer as long as you phrased it properly. Anyway. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. Let's have a look, first of all, at the Microsoft 365 administration portal. This is a portal you go into, it's right within Microsoft 365. If you go into the administration section, you can see here we're in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center in the upper left-hand side, and we can see some high-level reports of usage of various workloads in the tenant. And so the main screen, of course, is just the overall dashboard of usage. You can see down near the bottom, you've got some tiles around email activity, OneDrive files, SharePoint files, some trends over here on the left-hand side, and then a graph that shows you on a daily basis what the overall usage for each one of these workloads were. In the tiles, you can see each workload is broken down by a number of dimensions. In the case of email, it's sent mails, received mails, and read mails. In OneDrive, it's the amount of storage used. In SharePoint files, viewed or edited pages, shared externally, things of that nature. And you can drill into these various workloads if you wish to. For example, here you have email, and within email, you can see we've got the trend of messages sent, messages received, and messages read over time. The time period is selected at the top of the screen. You can see you have options of 7, 30, 90, and 180 days, and that's what you get. Down below, you see some detail. It's broken out into a table. In the case of email here, you have the number of the username, when their last activity was, and the number of actions in the selected time period. So you don't get it per day. You get it, in this case, for the 7-day period ending on March the 3rd, 2020, in most of these users' cases. Okay. Same sort of thing with SharePoint. The only difference here is we're looking at Viewed or edited items, synced items, items that were shared internally or shared externally. So again, the graph over time, same time frame, and the same sort of level of detail down here below. OneDrive, very, very similar, exactly the same dimensions, only it's per users. OneDrive, and Teams, which gives you the number of channel messages, the number of chat messages, the number of calls, and the number of meetings. This does not break down by team, let alone channel. It does break down by user, again, in the table at the bottom, with the selected time frame from above. And there are a number of other workloads that we're not going to drill into. Overall Office 365 usage, which includes number of users that were active, number of groups that were active. You have Yammer activity, very similar to the Teams activity, and Skype for Business, which has an awful lot of information, especially around telephony, which isn't all that surprising because this part of the dashboard was originally built to support Skype for Business in the first place. Now, I talked a little bit before about time as an important dimension, and you can see what you can get out of these reports, 7, 30, 90, and 180 days as mentioned. After 180 days, however, your data is gone. It's purged. There's no way to get it back. You can get day level granularity, but only in the charts. As you saw before in the table down below in the pages, you didn't get that level. You can, however, from the Admin Center export data, and when you export it, you're going to get a CSV file back from the system. And it's going to be exactly what you saw in that table, minus user data. So you can see the example here on the screen. We've got a number of dates, and that each one of those represents a user, each row of data, but we don't know who that user is. And the number of report periods you get are limited to the periods that are available in the dashboard. And this brings us to the Microsoft 365 Usage Analytic app. Well, this almost brings us, here we go. This brings us to the Usage Analytic app. And the Usage Analytics app is a Power BI template app, which means you need to be using Power BI, and you're going to need to have either a pro license. Well, you are going to need to have a pro license to be able to create this, and for users to be able to view the data or view the data from the reports and the app. They're either going to have a pro license, or you will have to have deployed it to premium capacity. The dataset owner, the person who creates this, must have the reporting role in the dashboard. By the way, you need that same role for the admin dashboards I was just showing before. But in this case, whoever creates the app has, or whoever's refreshing the app has to have this reporting role. And that's in order to be able to get the data from the system that you have to have that role. However, with this, you can grant access to the application to users without that role. Once you get the data out of the system, you can do whatever you want with it. Now, the source data for this application is updated daily. And that means where the Usage and Analytics app is getting its data from is updated daily, but you still have to update the app itself, which means, in the worst case scenario, your data could be up to 2 days out of date. Even though we're using Power BI, which is very much an analytical tool, I would suggest that the Usage and Analytics application is more of a reporting tool than an analytics tool, and I'll show you a little bit why right here. I'm just going to fire up my Power BI. Here we are. We're in my Power BI environment. I'm going to go up to Apps, and I've already deployed a Microsoft Usage Analytics app. I'm going to open this up. We're going to have a quick look at what's inside. So as I open it, I'm taken to the executive summary page. And by the way, if you've tried this in the past, this might look a little different. It's been recently updated. It looks a lot better these days. And you can see a bunch of numbers here. I'm recording this on the 26th of May. And you can see all of my data here is for April, the number of active users in April. Most of them are number of active users. Total files in SharePoint as of April, end of April, in fact, is what this is. We don't have any way here to see across months or days, etc. It's really just a snapshot in time. If we come down here to the overview, however, we can see that we can go back a year on a summary of some of this data. Now, if we look at, for example, in 2019 in June, you can see here it is broken out by workload. So we do have it to the month level of granularity, back a year with the usage and analytics app. But we can't go any further than that. We can't get down to the day level, and we can't now pivot on user. We can come up to the top here and say, I just want to look at detail for a particular workload, let's say OneDrive. And if I open up June, you can see really all that's doing is filtering the content here. All right. And there are a number of other different ways to measure, or a number of different pages and tabs that we can drill into. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move along, and I'm just going to point out why I think this is a bit more of a reporting tool than it is an analytics tool. I'm going to come up here. Oh, actually, I'm in an app. So what I want to do is edit the source of the app. I do that by selecting the pen, and it takes me down here to a workspace, a Power BI workspace. And the Power BI workspace is behind the analytics app itself. So if I come in here, I can open up the report, and it looks exactly the same. But what I'll be able to do now is edit the report. And I could, if I wanted to, republish it. But I'm just going to come down here very quickly. I'm going to go into edit. And I'm going to create a new page over here. And you can see here, here's the tabular structure that's behind the report. I'm going to come in under user activity. I want to look at user activity. I'm just going to pick one of these measures. I'm going to pick exchange appointments, I think. Is appointment created. All right, doesn't really matter what we're selecting. And I've got a calendar dimension table up here. So I'm just going to grab it, and I'm going to pick date. That's going to go on my axis. I'm going to lose quarter because I don't need quarter. And you can see I've got a number of appointments for 2020. And of course, if you're used to Power BI, you know you can drill down or drill out and across. I'm going to do that. But as I drill down, you can see here's April 2020, and nothing's changing really. I mean, and we wind up with April 1st, 2020. What's going on here? The reality is a lot of these measures that are in here are only snapshots in time. We don't have data over a period of time for a lot of the stuff. To do that, we actually have some that do have that. However, I'm going to just lose calendar from here. I'm going to come down and pick a different measure. I'll look at, say, tenant OneDrive, and let's just go with disk used. How much disk has been used? Let's make that our value. Going to remove the other measure, and from within the same table I can pick a content date, make that my axis. And what we can see now, we've got some breakdown. We've got 2019 data and 2020 data, and it's summed up. If I want to drill down here, we can break it down. It's broken down into quarter. You can see Power BI breaks things down into time periods for us. I'm going to go down another level to take us down to the month, and I'm going to take us down to the day, and you can see again, we're at month level granularity, but at least this way we can go back a year. So this is showing us the amount of disk quota over time. So some of these measures we can do over with at least month level granularity, but we can't do something like for the month of February, show me everything around Exchange and everything around OneDrive, et cetera, et cetera. They're all different time dimensions. So this is really designed to show a particular set of reports. Okay, enough of that. All right, and so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the reporting APIs. Reporting APIs are very similar to the last two section that you've seen. Basically, it's pre-aggregated data that you can go and get for yourself. But in this, the first case, it was preset reports, and the other was kind of a canned application that's a series of reports as well, a little more granular. In this case, you can just go and get the data yourself, and the URL at the bottom shows you how to go about and get it. But the workloads that you see here should be fairly familiar. It's more or less driven from the same data that's behind both the admin console and the usage and analytics API, and it's got the same sort of granularity with some minor differences. When you make a call to that endpoint, you get a CSV back from it. And depending on how you call it, will affect the data you're getting back. In this case, we're getting Teams user activity in both cases. In the right-hand case, however, we're asking for a specific date in time, 1 day. And on the left-hand side, we're saying for this 7-day period. Remember those periods, 7, 90 days, etc. So you can have all of those periods, and the numbers are all added up together. When you do get a period of time, you're going to get every user. in the tenant, and you do get user information here, whether or not they've had any activity. If you ask for a specific day of activity, you're only going to get those users that had activity on that given day. But at least at this level, you could go and get that information and store it on a daily basis, and you would have day level granularity of some of your usage data. So you can see, and how often, when I specify the day, how far back can I go? I can go a month. I can also then go back for 70 days, 30 days, 90 days, or 180 days, and I can only do that for 180 days. And after that, that data is purged. Same as the other situations I was talking about. What's our latency? It all depends on the workload. So some workloads report or basically refresh their data on a daily basis. Some every 2 days. One of them, the Skype one in particular, a couple of the data points in Skype is every week that the data gets refreshed. So don't expect to see up-to-date data or even data up to yesterday for every single one of your endpoints all of the time. It really depends on which one it is. Unified audit log. Now the unified audit log is kind of like the holy grail if you're looking for event data in Office 3 or Microsoft 365. I really got to stop saying that. It's well hidden. It's in the Compliance Center. And if you go into the Compliance Center, go under search, you'll find the audit log search. And you can see there are a ton of activities that you can search for. So just as an example here, it's the screenshot here has file and page activities. These are the type of activities you can search for across that. But a number of workloads, lots of workloads that you haven't already seen in the presentation, things like Power BI itself, Stream, etc. They all have activities that are recorded here. And you can search this data for back to 90 days in most cases. We'll talk about that here in just a second. And get an item level detail, and that's what you're seeing here. So you can see it on a specific date and time, what address, what IP address, and what user did what on what. And there's quite a lot of detail around, depending on what the activity was. There's an awful lot of metadata that you can dive into on each one of these items. So how do you make this work, or how do you get at this? You do have to turn it on. If it's not been turned on in your tenant, you have to actively turn it on, and then data starts being collected from that point forward. So it's not going to go back in time. Data is, as I mentioned, being stored at the transactional level. As it happens, it's recorded. And by the way, that search should show things up fairly quickly. We'll get to that here in just a second too. The data is kept for 90 days for all of these endpoints by default. If you're going to access it using the API for the management the management API, which is what is used to get at this stuff, you can only go back 7 days of data. But in terms of the overall retention, an organization can change that retention to a total or a maximum of 1 year, but only for SharePoint, Exchange, and Azure Active Directory. How quickly that dashboard or those events are available to be seen in the dashboard depends on what type of activity they are. Some items, the service level agreement is for 24 hours. For others, it's 30 minutes. In practice, I often see things show up within 5 minutes. How do you get at that data? You have a number of different ways to do it. You can use the search, which I just showed you. You can use PowerShell. PowerShell works just like the search, so you can go back the 90 days with PowerShell. Or there's a management API you can use to go and get this data. And then but then you can only go and get it for 7 days. It's a little more flexible than using PowerShell. Okay, and everything we've been talking about so far has been around activities. What happened? What if you want to know about what you have? What's your inventory? How many documents do you have in your tenant? How many documents of a particular type have you had, or how many reads have you had of a particular document type? You're going to need inventory data, and the way you can go and get that is through the Microsoft Graph. And I'm just going to talk briefly about Graph Data Connect here as well. Graph is a programmer's tool. You're going to have to basically write code to go at this, although there is a tool called the Graph Explorer. It's on the Graph website, and it lets you sign in, so you don't have to mess around with all of those tokens and that sort of thing, and lets you query the graph. So there's a lot of examples. I suggest you dive in there if you're interested in this area and find out what you can do. There is a tool that's out there called Microsoft Graph Data Connect. It's a big data tool. You're going to need to use Azure Data Factory to work with it. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull any of your Exchange data into an Azure Blob Storage or a data lake mechanism. From there, you can go and get that data with any reporting tool you want, or you can use that to feed anything else. So this is really just an ETL tool to go and get data out of the graph en masse, and it only works, at least today, with Exchange style data. And that finally brings us to third-party products. You can do all of this stuff yourself, or you can go out and buy something off the shelf that gives you analytics around Microsoft 365. And there's really three approaches to doing this sort of thing. The first one is the classic Google Analytics style approach, which is page injection. Put some JavaScript on a SharePoint master page, essentially, or in a web part, and have it call home every time the user opens the page. That's got a lot of value particularly around page analytics. It can be very rich in that area, but of course you have to be interacting with SharePoint pages to be able to get value out of that. For example, it wouldn't be able to tell you how many OneDrive files were synchronized, or files were synchronized in any way, for that matter. Also, if you go in through the API to consume content, that's not going to get registered. Wiretapping is another approach, which I've seen that used by one vendor, whereupon a device is put on the outside of the corporation's firewall, and all traffic between the corporation and Microsoft 365 is analyzed and broken down. It works, but you have to be going through the firewall for that. So I'll leave that to you as to whether or not that's a good idea. The other approach is to do warehousing, which is gather up the data from all of these different signals, from the graph, from the management API, et cetera, as granular as you can, store them in a proper data warehouse, and then report on them that way. And of course, that's what we do. You might have detected my bias already here, although we do a certain amount of page injection for detailed page analytics for an upcoming product as well. So with that, I'm just going to wrap it up. My half hour is at an end. The important thing to know when you're reporting from Office 365, from Microsoft 365, the first thing you need to know is to understand the need. If you just need to know how many documents have been sent over a 7-day period, the dashboard, the admin dashboard, is going to serve your need. You have to know who your audience is. Do I want to be able to distribute this out to people I don't want to necessarily grant report access to that dashboard? Well, I'm going to need to use another tool like the application I showed you earlier. It's with everything. There's always a trade-off between complexity and flexibility. So know what you're dealing with. And the important thing, the really, really important thing, is you need to understand data retention. How far back do you want to go, and how granular do you need to analyze your data? That's going to really inform the approach you take. So with that, I want to thank you. Any questions? I'm not sure how we'll be taking these, but you can certainly reach out to me on my social channels listed down below. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being a part of the Galactic Collaboration Summit. Join the community and meet in-person world-class Microsoft and MVP speakers this autumn in Wiesbaden, Frankfurt, Germany, with 15 full-day tutorials and over 150 Microsoft 365 and Azure sessions at the combined European Collaboration Summit and European Cloud Summit from 26 to 28 October 2020. Community rocks.